What if marketing yourself did not have to feel like shouting into the void or pretending to be somebody you are not? I'm Wynne Leon, and in this episode of The Life of Try, I'm talking with brand strategist Nancy Martira of Clew Strategy about the deeply human work of being known for what we actually value, create, and contribute. Nancy helps expert led businesses and professionals find what makes them impossible to ignore. And in this conversation, she brings that same clarity to authors, writers, job seekers, and anyone who finds it uncomfortable to sell themselves. We talk about the difference between reputation and brand, the risk of a gap between what we say and how people experience us, and why the first step in promoting anything, whether it's a book, a business, or our own work, is believing we have something of real value to offer. We also get into the pressure to be everywhere, post everywhere, and keep feeding the algorithms. And Nancy offers a kinder, smarter alternative. Go where you're wanted. Instead of spraying our message across every channel, hoping something sticks, what if we looked for the people who are already looking for what we have to give? This conversation is about positioning, authenticity, storytelling, AI, and the courage to stay human in a noisy digital world. If you have ever wondered how to talk about your work without losing your voice, how to find your iconic space, or how to use technology as a tool without letting it flatten what makes you distinct, I think you'll find Nancy's perspective both practical and encouraging. Because the life of Try isn't about getting every message perfect. It's about doing the honest work of discovering what matters, sharing it with the people who need it, and trying to be clear enough and brave enough to be found. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Wynne. It's nice to connect with you. Thank you for inviting me to talk today.
I'm so excited because we were introduced to each other by our mutual friend Carl Beisch, who is a wonderful guy. You're a brand strategist, and that's a topic that both fascinates me and terrifies me.
Yeah. I
that
I don't get a lot of reactions of people being terrified. I think people are more afraid I'm going to try to sell them something, but there's really no need to be terrified.
selling ourselves is a little bit of a terrifying topic, and that's why I say that. I looked at your website and your LinkedIn profile, and you sort of make it approachable, like your company tagline, brand strategy and communications for humans,
Yeah.
which I love, and
Yeah.
your LinkedIn profile, helping expert-led businesses find what makes them impossible to ignore.
Yes. Yeah.
So even though it's like, okay, I could get that. I can, kind of grok those subjects. But one of the things that occurred to me is many of the people that I talk to are authors and writers. And do writers have brands?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I will say, so I have been a lifelong reader, a bookworm since I was a little kid, and I've had many friends who work in publishing. So I follow the publishing industry a bit as an amateur. And so this whole idea, like everything, the publishing industry has just been in major transition over the past few years, like all of our industries. The industry that I primarily work in, marketing, communications, creative advertising, also has just been really reshaped by all of these mergers and acquisitions. And I know it's very similar in publishing too. So the idea of, do authors have a brand? So first I'm going to start with the idea kind of reputation versus brand and how they're different. Because all of us have a reputation, right? A reputation is how people experience us.
Yeah.
And that can be whether or not we are standing in line at the post office, or we are posting on Blue Sky, or we are publishing a book, or writing an op ed, or standing in the school pickup line, honestly, and talking to people there.
And is
So,
that more like hardworking, friendly, approachable?
sure. I mean, there are people that if I say their names to you, like if I said Brene Brown or
Mm-hmm.
like a Scott Galloway, you would either say, I don't know who that is,
Mm-hmm.
or you would say, oh, when I hear that name, I think of this.
Of vulnerability and shame and
Yeah,
personal
bringing down.
storytelling, right? Mm-hmm.
Yep,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Right?
Um, and the difference is because the reputation is how other people experience you in the real world. A brand is kind of what you say you are,
Hmm.
what you stand for, who
Mm-hmm.
you are, what your values are. So if you're going to have a reputation regardless, because even the most introverted of us has some reputation, the way that you can kind of counterbalance that is by also cultivating a brand. Now, I don't think everybody needs to have a brand, and I don't think every author needs to have a brand. But if you want to be known for something, if you want to find new audiences for your work, if you want to be introduced, yeah, to new opportunities, I think that there is value in cultivating a brand with the caveat that the other side we have to address is what I call reputational risk.
Mm. Say more
So,
about that.
yeah, so if a brand is what you say you are,
Mm-hmm.
and then your reputation is how people actually experience you, there is sometimes a gap between those two things.
I was just thinking that. I mean, you totally nailed it because there's some self awareness necessary,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. So I call that the say do gap
Mm.
or the authenticity gap. And the wider that gap is, the more distance between what you say you are and what you stand for and how people experience you, that does create that layer of reputational risk there. Like everything, there is potential for risk, especially, society today is, I think we're all so raw and
Mm-hmm.
emotional because of the constant stress that we've been living under. So people are very sensitive. There's been a lot of sense of betrayal by heroes, including authors, people, who maybe a certain author, maybe that wrote a fantasy series that was really important to them when they were a young person have felt let down. So
Mm-hmm.
now people's guard is up where they're
Right.
looking at artists with more scrutiny than they have.
And are you trying to sort of like, do we have to like the artist to enjoy
That
their,
that is a much more difficult question
yeah,
and one that I think is really personal for people in terms of what the art means to them and kind of whatever transgressions the author or the artist has committed in their view. I think for some people it can be about putting money in their pocket, right?
hmm,
So if there's somebody who fundamentally you disagree with their views, you find that they are contributing to hate and fear, and a loss in human rights.
yeah,
I don't want to put money in that person's
right,
pocket.
right.
Now you could get a book from a library, you could get a book from a little free like there are different ways to do it, but at the end of the day, I think it's a very personal
Yeah.
and ethical decision we have to make.
And so circling back to that idea of reputation versus brand, a lot of this information that we get are about people's reputation, right? And then when that differs, and
Yeah.
that's the risk, right? Gosh, that doesn't really how they portray themselves as an author or what they say they're going to do with their business.
Yeah, it creates tension and it creates cognitive dissonance. And I think especially the relationship with art, because it is so deeply personal to us, you get to a point where you feel that sense of betrayal. And it can feel kind of deeply personal when a musician we like or an author we like, all of a sudden something comes out that causes us to see them in a different light. Now, we can talk about a lot of different high profile cases there, but even if you are, an author who's starting out or you're considering all the different paths to publication, things like that, just be aware that your reputation, part of your reputation is going to be how well you take feedback, how professional you show up on calls, things like that. Do you miss deadlines? Are you able to deliver on time
Right.
like you say that you're going to do? So those are things that, regardless of our profession, kind of we all have those
Mm-hmm.
opportunities to
Right.
kind of showcase ourselves and that we are living up to our brand promise. And then we also encounter those as opportunities where some days we just can't get there. We just can't meet the deadline because we are still humans and things happen. But I think in general, the amount of grace that we
Hmm.
have for each other is also being eroded, especially at a time when we're trying to offload as much work and creation and art as possible onto machines. It's definitely disrupting, the major industries that we talked about, every industry, every business model.
Yeah. I love that you talk about those as opportunities. So that's a really great way to reframe that. I've seen people, especially people who are blogging and author, being authors, that they use each channel for a different idea. Like, I'm going to do this one for photographs and this one for my work on nature, and what interests me about that and on our topic is, you know, we can try to stratify our
Right.
our interests and work products, but the reputation goes with all of them.
Yes, absolutely. And I started my career in this industry at
Yeah.
Ketchum,
Mhm.
which is a big global PR agency. And I started there in 2008, which was really when Twitter was just taking off. And so I would do a lot of trainings for really big companies about what Twitter meant and how to use it. And one of the things that we had to grapple with at the time was your employees using Twitter, and do they represent your business, your brand? And then for a while, people were just kind of throwing a line in their bio, like, my views do not necessarily represent those of my employer, which is fine to say, but what is the actual
Mhm.
reality of
Mhm.
that? And then we've seen people, lose jobs, lose opportunities, lose funding, lose grants because of what they've said. And is that in line with the brand that their employer wants to present?
Right.
So
Right.
at least as solopreneurs like myself, or as business owners, as artists, we don't necessarily have to worry about that layer so much of that parent company, but it will ultimately, affect our reputation. And if I post something political on LinkedIn that really speaks to my values, I know that I might be selecting out a group of
Mhm.
potential clients who are going
Right.
to read that and say, this person doesn't share my beliefs. This is not somebody I want to work with. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, because that goes to authenticity
That
too,
goes to
right?
authenticity, but it also goes to a lot of privilege too,
Mm-hmm.
you
That
know?
yes, yes, that's that's interesting. So there's a lot of people that are really good at one thing, like
Yes.
technology or writing, as an example, but find marketing themselves uncomfortable, right? And
Sure. Yeah.
because that's a whole different thing. And whether it's looking for a new job or publicizing a book, what are the first steps that they can take?
Yeah. Well, before we get, I think, maybe into the hopefully some actual
Yeah,
valuable content that
yeah.
people can use, I do want to put out a little manifesto, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is that what we are seeing in this moment, corporations have always wanted to get away with as little as possible. They've always wanted to make the most money for the least amount of effort and work and resources on their part. And now we're in this moment where politically we have this climate of deregulation, and it's kind of a free for all, just with grift out there. We have culturally, we're living in a moment where expertise has really been devalued, right? Where we no longer have trust in experts. So whether or not those are journalists or scientists or, public health officials, things like that trust has been eroded. And then technology wise, we're also living in a time where we're not just devaluing expertise, we're devaluing humans, right? There's this whole push that a machine can do it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you signed a book deal
Yeah.
maybe 10, 20 years ago, you would then have, hopefully, a significant amount of effort of the publishing house behind you, helping you promote that book. And they would have a specific department, they would have marketing people, they would have publicity people who all they do is know how to market and publish and promote books.
Right.
So, like everything else, they're trying to shift the burden of that away from the corporation onto us as individuals. It's not unlike when you go any place now, any kind of service interaction, they want you to tip, right?
Hmm.
Because they don't want to have to pay their employees a living wage. They're trying to shift the burden onto us as consumers, all of that. So, the first thing I want to say is it's not fair.
Yes, and on the publishing side as well, I wrote a technical book 28 years ago. I mean, the vehicle for how it was distributed was in bookstores. And so part of what the publishers did just was put it on the shelves. And that's become a different market for them as well. So, uh,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. So the
yeah.
first thing is kind of acknowledging this sucks. It's not
Yes,
fair.
it does.
It
Yes.
shouldn't be my job necessarily if I'm an author to then also market my book in the same way that it like the person working as a barista at the coffee shop shouldn't be depended on me tipping $3 per drink to be able to afford to live in that city. So first of all, it sucks and I think we're totally right to feel like this is unfair and this
Yeah,
is not what I signed up for.
right.
So the first thing you can do is you can always opt out and you can always say, I don't want to play these games, right? Now, again, that's also going to get to privilege, right? So if and I know a lot of authors now are being asked to self-fund book tours and the whole publicity plan is their social media channels. People sometimes report not being able to get a publishing deal until their audience reaches
Yes,
a
yes.
minimum level, right?
I've
So
heard that too.
there are ways to opt out, and that is basically by saying I'm not going to play this game and I'm going to find another way, another route. And that, of course, is much more complicated. That is instead of going down the well-trod path, that is hacking your way through the rough terrain.
Weeds, right.
But that is always an option.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So beyond that, so we live in this very imperfect world where experts are being devalued and nobody wants to pay for expertise anymore. And why not just ask Chat GPT to write your marketing plan and all of that? Well, so how do we navigate a middle path where we're not completely trying to forge new ground, but we're also not just like willingly going along with this? The first thing that I tell people is you have to believe that you have something of real value to offer. You have to have confidence in your work and in your skills and what you bring to the table. And one resource where I point people, there's a podcast. Alex Goldman has a podcast now. He used to be a co-host of a very popular podcast called Reply All. He now has a much smaller podcast called Hyperfixed. And he put out an episode. It's about a year old, so you have to go to like September 2025. Same thing, where he's saying, I'm a podcaster. I got into this industry because I was a journalist and I love producing radio content and all of this. And now I find myself, I've got this small independent startup podcast. I have to constantly ask my listeners, my fans, for money
Mm-hmm.
to stay alive. And
Mm-hmm.
I hate it and it's
Right.
really uncomfortable. And how does anyone do this? And so the reason why I recommend that people listen to this podcast episode is because he then brought on a person who is a professional fundraiser. They
Hmm.
do development for nonprofit organizations. And so these are the people that we all know that asking for money or asking for some kind of promotional favor or in-kind support is their job. They live and die by it. And they have to hear no 1,000 times
Right.
a month, right? So what lessons can we learn from them? And so I think that that is also this idea of one, you have to believe you have something of unique value to offer is really important. But another lesson that I got from listening to this person, and the person on Alex's podcast is a person named Haley Bash. And they wrote a book called The Accidental Fundraiser, which I haven't read. But if you're really struggling with this issue, that might be something that we can all think about because it does feel so vulnerable, so
Mm-hmm.
awkward to
Right.
ask. Whether
Mm-hmm.
or not you are asking for, a cash donation or asking for a friend to, share the link to your pre-order for your
Yes.
new book, like
Right.
that's a tough ask.
It is a tough ask. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, and that's where you're like, oh man. And you don't have to do it just once. You're gonna have to do it
Over and over
over and
and
over again. I
over
mean,
and
we know that even with the most, like, it takes six recommendations often for a book. I mean, and
sure.
that's if you're lucky, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
then how do you not sound like a broken record? Like, oh, read my book. Can you read my book? Can you
Yeah.
also review my book? Right?
Yeah.
Then
Can you post
you
a
got all
review on
sorts of
Amazon?
asks.
Can you post
Hmm.
it? Yes.
Hmm.
So another corollary to that is go where you're wanted.
Hmm. Say
You know,
more about that.
so if I'm sitting here and it's Monday morning and my doorbell rings and I have to get up and the dogs are barking and they're going nuts and I go to the front door and I open my door and there's a young adult, young guy standing there in a polo shirt saying he wants to talk to me about affordable solar options for
Yeah.
my home.
Hmm.
I don't want that.
Yeah.
And I have not given any indication that that is what I want or that that's what I'm open to. Versus if I'm part of a climate change action group or I'm going to a specific event or a conference where I'm really opting in and saying, this is something that's really important to me, I'd be much better able to receive somebody talking to me about consumer solar options, right?
Right.
So, this idea going back to channel strategy, distribution, all of that, where a lot of the messaging that we get is you have to be on every channel, you have to push, you have to broadcast your message, you have to essentially be saying, buy my book on every channel. You have to start a TikTok account, all of this.
Right.
That's not going where you're wanted,
Hmm.
right? That
Yeah.
is in marketing and in advertising when we used to do a campaign that was not necessarily very strategic, we would just throw a lot of money behind it and just, well, we'll just, throw all these things against the wall and see what sticks. We would call that spray and pray.
It's a good.
Right? So that is what you're doing.
Hmm.
And it takes a lot of time
Hmm.
to be putting out content on all of those channels consistently.
Yeah.
If you're not publishing content consistently, you're going to be penalized by the algorithm. Nobody's going to see it anyway, right? So one of the things I try to do when I work with my clients is get them to kind of step back from that ledge and really think strategically and saying, here's what it's going to take in hours, 15 hours a week or something like that, to really be producing and engaging enough content in some of these channels to the point where your content will be surfaced and people will see it. That still doesn't guarantee any conversion there, that they're actually going to then want to buy the book, write a review, whatever. What if you spent that time being a little bit more deliberate and thoughtful and thinking about where do people want this information?
Hmm.
Where can I find people who have already indicated this is what I'm passionate about, this is what I love, or I know I like this, I'm looking to expand my horizons and expose myself maybe to different genres or different authors. How do I get there?
Hmm.
And the thing about those audiences, those niche audiences, is that oftentimes they're much smaller.
Right.
And so essentially, we're also have to think about that trade-off of volume and potentially putting a message in front of thousands of people who don't care, aren't interested, don't want it, and in fact may unfollow or hide your ad or things like that because it's not the right place for you, versus going to a local library book club that maybe has 16 people, but there's 16 super engaged people who love reading, and maybe they love reading romance. It's a romance book club, and maybe you've written the exact perfect book for that group of people.
Right. Right.
So that is what I coach a lot of people in, and it's about going where you're wanted, which also then helps. It's so much easier
Hmm.
to sell or promote yourself to an audience that if they read this book, they're going to love it. They're
Yeah.
going to love this book because then you can get into the mindset of, I'm doing this person a favor. I'm introducing them to their next favorite book.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Well, and you have this wonderful workbook about for people who are seeking jobs,
yes,
and I want to focus on that in just a second. But one of the things that you say, and this is on your website, the most successful knowledge-based professionals don't just work harder; they work with clearer positioning, better
yes.
content systems, and professional infrastructure that scales. So, I mean, what you just talked about there is that same idea, which is you're working smarter, not harder,
Right.
essentially, right?
Yeah. In addition to working with other small businesses, mid-size agencies, brands, I work with people who are looking for their next job. And again, because so many of these industries have had a major disruption in the past few years, so many intelligent, experienced, creative, successful professionals have found themselves laid off and looking for a job again in a market that is really grueling, really depersonalizing, where it feels like is a human ever even going to look at my resume? Like who's on the other end of this? So what I try to communicate there is that we need to get to your unique value, because at a certain level, if you are a senior level account executive or whatever it is that you do, everybody with that title probably has the same credentials, the same degree, the same certification. They probably all have a body of work they can point to, a portfolio, they've got their KPIs that they can show off. And so, how do we find what really helps you stand out? And I was really gratified. I just started listening to the audiobook. So, are you familiar with the author George Saunders?
I'm
So George Saunders wrote Lincoln in the Bardo. He has a new book out now called Vigil. He also is a fantastic short story writer. He's got some great collections, The 10th of December. Excellent writer. I think he's won a MacArthur Genius Grant. He's won the Man Booker Prize, all of that. So he also is a English professor at Syracuse University in a very highly selective program. And in the opening of his book, it's called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. At Syracuse, he teaches this seminar on Russian short stories. And he takes 6 students a year into this program or this course out of about 700 applicants each year. And the way that he sees it is that at that level, everybody is a good writer, right? You don't even get into the consideration set of 700 applicants if you're not a good, skilled, talented writer. But then what he talks about his job is to not then take these people who clearly already know how to write well and teach them how to write well. What he says his job is to help those people find their iconic space. When I was listening to this, I said, "Oh, this is exactly what I've been talking about."
yeah.
In marketing, we call it, your unique value proposition. We call it all these different things, but it's the same thing. It's your iconic space, and he describes that as how he can potentially coach these students to write the stories only they could write.
That's brilliant. That's
Yes,
great.
using what makes them meaningfully themselves. And so there you go. That's an English professor's view of it. I'm a brand strategist, and that's my view of it too. I don't work with people to help them figure out what are the keywords I need to put in my resume, or, how do I write a summary or a cover letter that's going to get past the first, AI scanner. All of those things have value. Those are all really important tactics. But as a strategist, my job is to help them find that iconic space, that unique value, and work from what is the thing that only you can do.
How you break that down in your workbook and in your work. Your moment,
Yes,
when is it that people call you? Your
yes,
impact, what is it that you know,
yeah,
can do? And edge, why can you do
exactly.
that the best? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, so that is the framework that I've created, and it was based out of, again, the work that I do for brands, corporations, businesses, when I do brand strategy with them, I adapted that for people who are mid to senior career professionals who are maybe looking for their next full-time job. There was a formula that was very popular a few years ago, right? That was, I help X, insert audience here, do Y, like what you do, by, and this is how you get to it.
Yep.
And that was a perfectly serviceable formula, but it's now the formula that if anybody knows a formula, that's the one they know and everybody uses. And so when we talk about trying to stand out, and specifically to stand out as distinctly human in an age of machine generated content, you need a different model. And so that's where I created Moment, Impact, Edge. And I have different ways to help people internalize this, but with Moment, just for an example, I tell people to think of Batman and Commissioner Gordon flashing the bat signal and say, what is the moment when people need you most? When they're like, help, we need Wynne. Only Wynne can do this. Nobody does this as well as Wynne. And get really clear on what that moment is. And then for impact, again, we're trying to transcend KPIs, and those things are important. People want to see that. They want to see, I grew the book of business X% year over year, and our net promoter scores went up this much. That's tactical. A strategist is saying, what becomes possible when Wynne is involved that isn't otherwise possible? What transformations are happening that we never even planned for, or we never even expected? So it's just helping people get to that level of clarity and also differentiation that's hard to do for yourself.
Well, you make that point too, because you say it's hard for us to talk about ourselves, and this goes back to the whole, I've written a book about it, but I don't necessarily want to tell you that I have, and talk about this. And one of the formulas that you have in your workbook is for creating like a LinkedIn profile, your opening, your proof points, your edge, your call to action. And it seems like all that comes together too for creating a book pitch. What's your opening? Who does it speak to? And put it in story format. I love that also about your work is how people tell stories about it.
Yeah, so a lot of my work is focused on what is the narrative, what is the story there.
Yeah.
And you would think that authors naturally have an edge there, right? Like you have to be able to tell a good story to write, if you're writing fiction, and even if you're writing nonfiction, honestly, because for many human beings, the way that we process information best is through stories, is through narratives. But when it comes to pitching the book or sending out a query letter or doing that storytelling piece goes out the window and they get more focused on the formula.
Yeah.
And they get more focused on what's worked. And we all readers have a pet peeve that books are now marketed by comparing the book to another book that was very successful previously. Like, oh, for fans of Anne Patchett, if you loved All the Light We Cannot See, you'll love, and then you get the book and you're like, I loved that book. I love that author. This book is nothing like that. It's such it's so lazy.
Well, yes, and we all read books differently.
Of course, of course. And we all have different things that we look for in a book or that land with us or that create that connection. And for some people, it will be plot,
Yeah.
it will be character development, it will be language. So just getting smart about understanding the story behind your story.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such good advice, and so good about saying dig deeper, go
Deeper.
So one of the things, and we've sort of danced around this subject in a lot of the answers, is technology has changed things, and so first of all, it says we can have all the answers, we can make your 10-point marketing plan for you, blah blah blah, or but also in we're trying to write titles of posts of things that are SEO friendly, but
Yeah, sure.
don't sound like us at all. So how do we navigate having a brand, speaking to that brand, being authentic, and also have something that works for the algorithm?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is tough. And that is something that, we had talked about over email before this. And I said, I don't have an answer, but I'm happy to have the conversation
Right.
with you. So the first thing I talk about, and you did mention that the tagline for my business is strategy for humans. And so the first thing I try to tell people is that regardless of how you feel about AI, and it's very complicated and very loaded and all of that, you have to start with a human-based strategy. Never, ever, ever let the machine or a chatbot develop your voice, do your writing,
Hmm.
um, develop your strategy. And it just so happens, I spent yesterday with one of my favorite people in the world. My husband's uncle is visiting, and he's worked in advertising for many years in creative production. And we were talking about what AI can do and what AI cannot do. And I said, the thing about AI is that it aims for the middle.
Hmm.
It doesn't create,
Right.
it completes patterns. So it knows if I type in X, Y, statistically, the most probable, likely next character or word is Z,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
And so AI is never going to break new grounds. But if you want to retread old grounds, and if you want to kind of recycle things that have already worked, it can be a tool. Now, there's all the ethical considerations to think about as well, and how we're going to use that. And again, that's a deeply personal discussion I think that we all have to have within our own code of ethics. I don't find anything wrong with saying, I've written this blog post, I want to publish it on my blog. Hey, AI, can you tell me what the keyword should be and
Yeah.
what's the best way to title that?
Yeah.
But before I can do that and have any kind of meaningful results, I need to then train that AI on my strategy.
Hmm.
And the
Interesting.
strategy is what originates with me and with my humanity. So that is where I'm saying, this is who I want to reach.
Hmm.
This is what I care about. These are the clients I want to work with. These are the clients I'm not interested in working with.
Yeah.
Giving it all of that information. These are the people that seem to be attracted to my work, but actually, I have this idea that there's this whole other group of people over here that could
Yeah.
really benefit, but they're not thinking about me. And so I will use AI sometimes like that to help me with things like SEO metadata and SEO titling. Absolutely. The other thing is, you can title the blog post anything, and then you can have an SEO title that's completely different,
Hmm.
right?
Interesting.
It's
Yeah.
trying to gamify
Yeah.
the algorithm, right? And so again, we're talking about this sucks. We have been forced into this world that doesn't empower or encourage us to thrive as humans. So if we're going to play the game, and find a way to play the game on our own terms in a way that is authentic to our values, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But
Well,
what
and
I don't want to do is sacrifice my humanity and my unique point of view in order to get a pair of eyeballs on my blog post.
yeah. Well, I love what your answer. I'm jumping out of my seat because you had so much in that answer that you've already said, which is know your worth, right? I mean, that you're going to have to use and um, figure out what audiences you want to direct to, and then use the technology to
Yeah,
gamify the system.
yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too, when we talked about that uncomfortable, it's had so uncomfortable to market yourself. And for more people, it's for certain people, it's more uncomfortable than others. And I said, you have to believe that you have something of real value to offer. And if you have outsourced writing your book to AI, you don't have anything of real value to offer, right? So it's also understanding when to use the tools and what the limitations of the tools are. And now we're in this environment where even if you've written a book and it's, your own work and it's deeply personal and it's your original thought, and then there's maybe a temptation to use AI to design the book cover.
Mhm.
And so how do we reconcile those things? I know a person I used to work with who's a brilliant guy, really smart, really thoughtful, connected, curious, takes big risks, and he writes great content. And I actually reached out to him on LinkedIn, and I don't know if this was the right move, but I said, "Hey, your work is so good and your posts are so interesting and so thoughtful,
Yeah.
and I think you really have something unique to say, but every time you post, you include a cheesy AI generated image. And when I see that image, it cheapens the
Mm-hmm.
work to me and it turns me off."
Right.
And I said, "I think you're doing a disservice to your work by then using, AI generated imagery." And
Mm-hmm.
in different cases it could be different things there, right?
Yeah.
So, if I wrote a book and then I used AI to develop my pitch letter,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really generic and I hadn't even taken the time to, like, replace people's names correctly, things like that. It's
Right.
it's the same thing,
Right.
right?
Right.
So it's thinking about the whole package and how the technology we use or we don't use, or when we really invest our own thought capital and voice into things, how that speaks to reputation
Hmm.
and
Right.
brands throughout. And again, if you're an author and you're trying to self-publish and you want to have a cover and you don't have the money to hire an illustrator, a really talented cover designer to do, like, I understand the temptation there and the frustration and saying, why can't I just have Chat GPT design my cover? Um, and so it's a choice we all have to make. Um, but just from my perspective, that's in the same way that if I see a restaurant and their menu is AI generated, it just makes everything a little less appetizing to me.
So this is a really good way to put it. And I think you've given us another way to think about it, which is do the work to sketch it out or know what your themes are, to go in with it with the audience in mind. And then if somebody draws a couple pixels for you, then that, or if AI draws a couple pixels for you, that's a different story than just saying,
Right,
draw me something.
right.
Yeah.
Well,
Nancy, I love this conversation. So much good, meaty stuff that we can do and think about. And whether it's looking for the next job or just thinking about how to market a book, you just have added so much value. So you're right on brand.
well, thank you, and thank you for being a great conversation partner and a human conversation partner.
Yes.
I really enjoyed it. My work is under my own brand,
Yep.
Clew Strategy,
Clue
and that's
strategies.
Clew spelled Clew.
Mm-hmm.
And as again, I work with all kinds of people, small business owners, mid-sized firms, as well as authors.
Yes, and I'll link to that, and I'll link to your workbook and your LinkedIn profile. Tell me, is there a story behind Clue Strategies behind the name?
Yes, absolutely. Are you familiar with the word Clew, Clew?
I'm not.
So it is where we get the modern word clue, Clue, from,
Yeah.
and it comes from Greek mythology. It comes from the myth of the Minotaur. There's this monster, the Minotaur, half man, half bull, in the labyrinth, and he requires human sacrifice. And so they have to sacrifice all these young people. And they send people in to try to kill the Minotaur, and either he kills them or they can't find their way back out of the labyrinth. And so the Minotaur ends up getting them in the end. And so when Theseus came, it was his turn, and he said, "I'm coming, I'm going to slay the Minotaur, I'm going to end this terrible, human sacrifice we have to do." The king's daughter, Ariadne, fell in love with him at first sight. And before he went into the labyrinth, she gave him a clue, Clew.
Hmm.
And Clew is the word for a ball of yarn or string. And she told him, as you go into the maze, unravel this thread, and then you'll be able to find your way back out again. So that is the textual kind of meaning behind the
Yeah.
word clue. And I'm also a lover, particularly of golden age mystery fiction and all of that.
Yeah.
And I'm also a fiber artist. I knit, I crochet, I weave. So the clue is the ball of yarn is so important to me.
Yeah.
But then there's also subtext behind it too. And I do have a blog post, so maybe I'll send that to you. So you
Yes.
can see
Please.
a little
Please
bit
do.
more
Yeah,
behind.
because you're helping us navigate the labyrinth. I mean, that's what's so good about that
Yeah.
story and name. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that.
Thank
And
you, Wynne. It was lovely to speak with you.
wonderful to speak with you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Life of Try.
I hope this conversation with Nancy Martira gave you a little more courage and clarity around the work of being seen. Not by becoming louder or shinier or more like everyone else, but by getting more honest about what you value, what you offer, and where your work is truly wanted. If this conversation stirred something in you about brand, reputation, authenticity, or the gap between who you say you are and how you are experienced, I'd love to recommend another Life of Try episode. Identity Before Strategy with Kevin Yoder. Kevin's work explores why lasting change often begins below the level of tactics, with the identity, self-image, and beliefs we are carrying into the next version of our lives. Together, these two conversations make a beautiful pair. Nancy helps us think about how we show up in the world, and Kevin helps us look at the inner foundation we are showing up from. Because sometimes the next try is not just about posting more, pitching harder, or finding a better plan. Sometimes it's about becoming more aligned, inside and out, with the person we're trying to become. As always, thank you for being part of my tribe of learning, stumbling, growing, and beginning again. If this episode encouraged you, please share it with someone who might be trying to find their voice, their audience, or their next brave step. And until next time, keep servicing what matters, keep sharing what you discover, and keep trying.